Railway transport is a symbol of progress and the era, a connecting thread of civilization. The first railway, built in 1825 in England, opened a new era, a time of rapid change. Soon, steel highways spanned continents, crossed mountains, deserts, and endless plains. Railway transport became not just a means of movement, but also a driving force of industrialization. In this documentary, you will learn how cumbersome steam locomotives evolved into high-speed trains, how railways were used during wars, and which trains are the most outstanding and unusual. Even before the appearance of full-fledged steam locomotives, railways began to use horse traction. In the 18th century in England, there was the Wollaton Wagonway, a railway where horses pulled wagons loaded with coal between mining settlements. In the 19th century, horse traction became a convenient means of passenger transportation, with the speed of the train being about 10 kilometers per hour. The first passenger horse-drawn railway was opened in Great Britain in the year 1807. However, because the railways were often single-track, freight trains had priority, and sometimes passengers had to get out of the carriages and remove them from the rails to let the freight trains pass. By the early 1900s, steam locomotives had largely replaced horse-drawn trains, with few remaining. In 1827, the South Carolina Canal and Railroad Company held a competition for the best locomotive powered by horse traction, with a prize of $500. The victory was claimed by an unusual project by American engineer Christian Detmold, Detmold's locomotive Flying Dutchman. It was a carriage with a treadmill in the center, on which a horse stood. By moving on it, the horse set in motion a system of gears that rotated the axles of the carriage. In the 30th year, the Flying Dutchman traveled for the first time along a 10-kilometer section of railway, reaching speeds of up to 20 kilometers per hour and carrying 12 passengers. Despite the success, the chief engineer convinced the company's management to switch to steam locomotives, since the capabilities of horses were limited. Soon, the railway company decided that using animals would be a gross misuse of the gifts of genius and science. Before the final transition to steam power, the company also experimented with wind. During the tests, a carriage with a sail accelerated to 25 kilometers per hour, but the wind was so strong that it blew the mast off the carriage. As a result, a steam locomotive named Best Friend of Charleston was acquired, which could carry up to 50 passengers at a speed of 55 kilometers per hour, a record for that time. However, its operation lasted only 5 months. The boiler exploded after a fireman blocked the safety valve, trying to get rid of the annoying whistle. The last attempts to preserve horse-drawn locomotives were made in the 29th year at the Rhine Hills Trials. In the competition with steam locomotives, the cycloped locomotive participated, but its horse fell through the wooden platform, and the machine was disqualified. Despite further improvements in design, progress was inevitable, and soon horses disappeared from the railways forever. But suddenly, the horse-drawn tram has survived to this day. In the city of Douglas, United States of America, there is a unique summer route served by 45 horses. In bad weather, this unusual public transport does not operate. But in the summer, anyone can ride the last working horse-drawn tram. Unique journeys. This marvel of free thinking was created by an automotive giant in the 1950s at the request of several railway companies. They needed high-speed locomotives to compete with the rapidly developing civil aviation and to attract passengers. Great hopes were placed on the unusual Aero train, which was released in 1956. Its design was developed by the famous Chuck Jordan, known for his stylish cars and concept vehicles. However, there were no revolutionary solutions in the design of the train under this brand. Automotive engineers simply adapted several of their buses, replacing the chassis. Nevertheless, the train was light and fast. Fully loaded, it weighed less than half of contemporary steam locomotives. They built 2 prototypes and handed them over to railway companies for testing. The test results were disappointing. The weak engine did not provide either high speed or the ability to overcome elevations. The locomotive turned out to be difficult to maintain and repair, In addition, its low weight worked against comfort. Passengers complained that the train felt like a truck bouncing along a bumpy road. In the end, after covering 970,000 kilometers, by 1966, both prototypes were retired. Today, these unique aero trains can be seen in American museums. And this is the Super Chef. The train made its first journey in 1936. Its route from Chicago to Los Angeles was 3,500 kilometers long. Its composition was unique in its own way. In addition to the locomotive's appearance, which was unusual for that time, it was powered by a diesel-electric unit. This allowed it to reach a decent speed of up to 160 kilometers per hour. The train's mystery was heightened by the fact that Hollywood stars traveled on it. The train had a super comfortable compartment, which would be more appropriately called a hotel room. The brand was preserved until 1974. The 20th century train of the company was considered one of the most luxurious and prestigious in the history of railroads. It provided fast and comfortable overnight service between the two largest economic centers of the United States of America, New York and Chicago. Businessmen and movie stars chose this route not only because of its speed, but also thanks to the highest level of service, which included luxurious sleeping accommodations, restaurants, a barbershop, and even maid services. At the beginning of the century, its competitor Pennsylvania also launched two flagship trains, the Century Limited and the Broadway Limited. They ran on exactly the same schedule and covered the route in 16.5 hours. The last modernization took place in 1948, when the trains were equipped with new cars, with panoramic windows and luxurious interiors in the Art Deco style. Gradually, it lost its status as an elite express. In the 1950s, it began to offer more affordable seats, and its popularity declined with the rise of air travel and the development of highways. In 1967, it was announced that the train would cease operations, which became a symbol of the end of the era of luxurious night expresses. Unlike the Broadway train, the Limited continued to operate until 1995, surviving the merger of railroad companies and the transition to management by another company. However, it too could not withstand the changes in the transportation industry. The train Devetu Siahi Devesti Pervu was called the Train of Tomorrow, a reputation aided by its memorable appearance at the time. It operated on the New York Central Railroad for more than 20 years, from 1936 to 1959. But aside from its looks, it was unremarkable. At the end of the 19th century, in America's railroad business, which was rapidly expanding its network, competition was so fierce that small companies were closing down one after another. William Holman's small company was in extremely bad shape. And then William came up with a truly brilliant move. Instead of developing new locomotives or new systems, he decided to surprise everyone by complicating the design of the old one. Holman used his last money to buy an ordinary locomotive and improved it. The wheels of the resulting mechanism were mounted on additional bogies, and a system of friction gears transmitted the force from them to the driving wheels, which were already standing on the rails. The inventor received a patent for his invention in 1895. The unique steam locomotive had an unusual wheel arrangement, with 2 tiers in the front and 3 in the rear. Coleman's nationwide advertisement highly praised the latest steam locomotive. It promised a 3-fold increase in speed, reduced wheel slippage due to more points of contact with the rails, and lower coal consumption. And most enticing of all, any old locomotive owned by Coleman's company could be converted into the new one. The marvel that appeared on the New Jersey Railroad in 1887 attracted attention with its strange appearance, aggressive advertising, and the blind faith of people that this was, without a doubt, the future of locomotive engineering. Riding the wave of success, the inventor issued shares for the enormous sum of $10 million for that time, and sold almost all of them. Only a year later, the experts who were brought in, horrified, provided proof that all the promised advantages of Holman's locomotive were pure fraud. There was no increase in speed or reduction in coal consumption. The wheel design only became more complicated, and William Holman disappeared from the business. The remarkable locomotive was converted back and continued to operate for several more years under the name Holman's Absurdity. But that's not all. In 1894, Holman returned with a new company and a new idea for locomotive bogies. 3 locomotives of the new system were ordered, but only one was completed. When the next batch of shares was successfully sold, the inventor disappeared, this time for good. And if we recall the most unusual trains, in Australia there is an annual festival. For those who missed out on playing with toy trains as a child, antique steam locomotives hold real races along a 30-kilometer route between Newcastle and Maitland. From 2 to 4 full trains with passengers take part in the competition. The firemen tirelessly throw fuel into the fire. Of course, environmentalists are outraged, but who will listen to them when there's a unique opportunity to ride a roaring steam engine and feel the spirit of the race for speed era? Now, the total length of the entire railway network in the world is about 1.3 million kilometers. But the share of high-speed sections, according to the International Union of Railways, is 56,000 kilometers. Moreover, the main part of such tracks is concentrated in China, Japan, and South Korea, 42,000 kilometers, as well as in European Union countries, 12,000 kilometers. In Russia and North America, there are no more than 1,000 kilometers. Even though the United States of America ranks first in terms of railway length, and Russia is third. Most modern high-speed trains, travel at speeds of 200 to 250 kilometers per hour. Only a few are capable of exceeding 250 to 300 kilometers per hour. But among them, there is an absolute record holder. Maglev, a train on a magnetic cushion, levitating in an electromagnetic field. The only commercial line of such a train connects Shanghai Airport with the nearest metro station. During tests, its maximum speed reached 501 kilometers per hour. However, due to the short route length of 30 kilometers, the train simply doesn't have time to accelerate to such speeds. Already at speeds just above 300, it has to start braking. As a result, the average speed of travel is about 260 kilometers per hour. Over several centuries, the design of locomotives and their engines has evolved greatly. Steam engines have turned into diesel, electric, turboprop, and even turbojet engines. The speed of trains also increased, from 50 kilometers per hour for Stephenson's rocket in 1829 on the Manchester-Liverpool section to 380 kilometers per hour. In modern Chinese, European, and high-speed rail, there were various attempts to move away from the classic two-rail track, but only one, the Shanghai Maglev, became established. But even trains on a magnetic cushion are in no hurry to completely abandon wheels. This Japanese experimental maglev uses wheel supports at low speeds, up to 150 kilometers per hour. A similar principle is used in the Inductrack magnetic levitation technology, developed at the Livermore National Laboratory in the United States of America. Here, permanent neodymium magnets are used, made from an alloy of the rare earth element neodymium, boron, and iron. In theory, such a train should levitate at a speed of just 2 kilometers per hour, but in practice, this happens only at 30. Inductrack still remains a concept rather than a real transportation technology, but it is planned to be used in the Hyperloop project. Elon Musk, as soon as it becomes possible to close the gap between the theoretical and practical levitation speed. But the fact is that all these advanced trains still move along roughly the same rails as Stephenson's train did back in 1825. How did rails even come about? Before trains, mines and quarries used carts pulled by horses. The rails for these carts were wooden and rectangular in cross-section. Cast iron production began in 1767, when cast iron rails were laid at a mine in England. These rails were only 1 meter long and had either a U-shaped form, known as Reynolds rails, or an L-shaped form, known as car rails, with flanges, to prevent the carts from derailing. One of the first railways in the world with angle rails was built in Russia in 1788, at the Alexandrovsky plant in Petrozavodsk. It connected the blast furnace, drilling, and boring workshops of the cannon factory. The evolution of rails continued, and in the early 1830s, the wide-flanged rail was introduced, which made laying the tracks easier. The steel's chemical composition and rail length also changed. Today, welded 800-meter rail strings are used for seamless tracks, but the wide-flanged rail profile has remained the same. The race for speed began on such rails starting at 50 kilometers per hour with Stephenson's rocket. In 1829, by the middle of the 19th century, the speed of trains had increased to 96, and by the end of the century, it exceeded 150. These records were set by steam locomotives with a small number of cars and without passengers. At the beginning of the century, electric trains joined the speed competitions. In 1899, the Prussian State Railway electrified 72 kilometers of track. The company Van der Ziepen and Scharl built 2 electric rail cars, one with a Siemens Halske motor, the other with an AEG motor. The electric rail car with the Siemens motor reached 128 miles h, while the one with the AEG motor reached 130 miles h. Soon, passenger high-speed railways appeared, on which, however, steam locomotives still dominated. In the 1930s, the diesel Fliegender Hamburger on the Hamburg-Berlin route accelerated to 160 kilometers per hour, while the diesel train Zephyr in the United States of America between Chicago and Denver reached 124 kilometers per hour. In 1932, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics started producing the Iosif Stalin and S-20 steam locomotives, which had a top speed of 71.45 miles h. In 1938, the English locomotive Mallard set the world record among steam locomotives at 202 kilometers per hour. But during passenger transportation, the speed of steam trains did not exceed 160 kilometers per hour. That's when the era of high-speed steam locomotives ended, and the era of high-speed electric trains began. In the same year, 1938 in Italy, the electric train ETR Dvesti was launched, which reached 160 kilometers per hour in commercial operation and set a world record for electric trains at 203 kilometers per hour, not far from Milan. The symbol of that era became the Japanese Shinkansen, which in 1964 began operating at a speed of 210 kilometers per hour. Since then, the operational speed of high-speed trains has increased to 300 to 350 kilometers per hour, and the record speed has exceeded 500 kilometers per hour. On the path of the race for speed, many engineering problems arose. Some were solved quite simply, for example, by replacing wooden sleepers with concrete ones and using harder railroad track surfaces. Longitudinal oscillation of the cars at high speeds was eliminated with the help of welded seamless rails. However, one of the main problems remained the oscillation of the wheel bogies at high speed, which could lead to dynamic instability and potential catastrophes. Modern technologies use various designs of yaw dampers, but this was not achieved easily. In 1932, the German engineer Franz Krukenberg received a patent for a damping device to stabilize the running of railway bogies. He proposed damping the oscillations of wheel bogies using a liquid damping medium between the car body and the bogies, which was essentially an early version of a telescopic shock absorber with a piston. The patented invention was implemented in rail transport, but it was only temporary. In 1901, they retrieved the patent by Wilhelm Jakobse from the archives. For articulated cars for railway trains, the cars were connected by shared four-wheel bogies located between adjacent cars. One wheel set was under one car and the other under the next. This way, the train became a single mechanism, and the problem of car swaying with the traditional rigid coupling was eliminated. The first Jacobs bogie was installed on the two-car diesel Flying Hamburger in 1932, and modifications of this solution began to be widely used in high-speed trains and even in the experimental Japanese Maglev Series 10. The next technological breakthrough was the patent of the Spanish engineer Alejandro de Goicoechea and Omar. He proposed an innovative system for trains that could stay on the rails at high speeds on mountain railways with overpasses and small turning radii. This system included a wheel bogie of triangular design, which provided stability. Two beams extended from the wheel set, converging at a sharp angle, which were fastened under the cars and connected to the crossbeam of the next wheel bogie. These beams were made lighter with an aluminum alloy, and the wheels had independent rotation. The cars built for the Goicoechea train were less than 5 meters long, and the Talgo 1 train itself consisted of 8 streamlined cars with a semicircular roof and received the fitting nickname Caterpillar. This train reached speeds of up to 115 kilometers per hour, but existed only as a single prototype. And just a few years later, the Talgo 2 appeared on regular routes with an operational speed of 120 kilometers per hour. Today, the Talgo company is one of the leading manufacturers of high-speed trains in Europe, with models such as the Talgo 250 and Talgo 350, where the numbers indicate the maximum speed. In 2015, the company conducted operations that brought in 1.27 billion euros. And in Russia, since 2015, the Talgo 9 intercity train called Strij has been operating. Interestingly, in his home country of Spain, the inventor Alejandro de Goicoechea is not appreciated. During the Civil War, in 1936, he, being an officer, switched sides from the Basques to the Francoists, taking important maps with him. Aviatrain. What would happen if you combined a train and an airplane? What if you put an aviation engine right onto a train? Many engineers have asked themselves this question over the course of a century. Interestingly, the fate of such engineers usually ended up being unfortunate. Let's take a look at these aviatrains. Abakovsky's Aerowagon. Valerian Abakovsky was born and raised in the Russian Empire, in the city of Riga. After moving to the newly formed Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic, he began working as a driver for the All-Russian Extraordinary Commission, the VCHK. History does not tell us where Abakovsky got his engineering skills, but in 1920 he was able to construct, at the Tambov Railway Workshops, a motorized rail car with an aviation propeller, which was called the Aerowagon. The invention was brilliant in its simplicity. An aviation engine installed at the front of the rail car provided a higher speed than a regular railway motor. Although energy efficiency was not a priority at the beginning of the century, Abakovsky's Aerowagon consumed relatively little fuel, accelerating up to 140 kilometers per hour, and was intended for transporting high-ranking officials. Presumably, the Aerowagon was used for about 2 years, but only one test trip is recorded in history. On this trip, the technical innovation departed from Moscow to Tula with 21 passengers, including Abakovsky himself and the well-known political figure Fyodor Sergeyev. The train arrived safely in Tula, but on the way back it derailed at high speed. As a result of the disaster, 7 people died, including Abakovsky and Sergeyev. The cause of the tragedy could have been technical malfunctions, design flaws, or sabotage. The death of the designer and an important state official halted the development of this idea. It was halted, but not completely. Rail airship. The next in chronological order after Abakovsky's attempt was the project of the German aircraft designer Franz Krukenberg. He continued the idea with an aviation engine. In 1929, the German began developing the Rail Zeppelin, in German called the Schienenzeppelin. It is unknown how much he was inspired by Abakovsky's idea, but his aerotrain had a similar operating principle. Because of its streamlined shape and aluminum cladding to reduce weight, it was called a rail airship. The train was equipped with 2 6-cylinder BMW aircraft engines at first, later replaced by a 12-cylinder BMW 6 engine with a power of 600 horsepower, which drove the pushing propeller. Unlike the previous Aerowagon, here the propeller was located at the rear. The only example was assembled in 1930. The capacity became twice as large as that of the Aerowagon, 40 passengers. The Schienenzeppelin quickly set speed records. In 1931, it exceeded 200 kilometers per hour for the first time, and a month later, it reached 230 kilometers per hour, a record that lasted until 1954. The high speed was achieved thanks to its low weight, about 20 tons, and design measures to improve stability. To prevent derailment, the drive shaft was tilted at 7 degrees, creating a slight downforce. However, the project had serious drawbacks. The exposed propeller posed a danger at stations, the train was too noisy, and the existing railway tracks were not suited for such speeds. In 1934, it was modernized by installing a Maybach engine, but soon after it was sold to the German Imperial Railway for 10,000 Reichsmarks. In 1939, the rail Zeppelin was dismantled because its metal was needed for Hitler's army. Bertin's aerotrain. The next person to carry on the idea was the French engineer Jean Bertin. He began his career in the aerospace industry, then developed high-speed hydrofoil boats. It was here that he became fascinated with engineering ideas. In the 1960s, when France announced a competition to create high-speed rail transport, he decided to apply the hydrofoil principle to trains. Bertin knew about the failures of his predecessors, but he believed in success. In '63, he presented the first model of the aerotrain to the government authorities at a scale of 1 to 12. The project received support and a company was created, which by the end of the year built the first prototype, Aerotrain 01. A test track 6.7 kilometers long was opened for it. On it, the train accelerated to 100 kilometers per hour, and soon after to 200. Bertin decided to replace the screw engine with a jet turbine, and the train reached 303 kilometers per hour, and later even 345 kilometers per hour. In 1967, the two-seater Do, after the installation of the turbine, accelerated to 422 kilometers per hour. This made it possible to start the construction of an 18-kilometer test track between Rouen and Sedan. And so, in 1969, they presented the 180. The first passenger version, it accelerated to 250 kilometers per hour and passed tests at full capacity, carrying high-ranking guests and journalists. The project was also monitored in the United States of America. In 1970, a company began constructing the American counterpart, UTACV. Meanwhile, Semberton was improving the 180, which set a speed record for air cushion trains, of 430.4 kilometers per hour. Success seemed inevitable. In 1974, the French government signed a contract to build a commercial line between Lia Défense and Cergy. But just 26 days later, the contract was terminated without explanation. Many linked this to politics. The project was supported by President Georges Pompidou, while his successor, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, backed a competing technology. High-speed electric trains could reach similar speeds, but had an important advantage. They used conventional rails and did not require expensive monorail tracks. The Aerotrain project was closed, and in 1981, the first line of the competitors was launched. Jean Bertin, disappointed by the failure of his idea, died in 1975. Jet train. In the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, they also returned to the idea of using jet engines in transportation. In 1970, the Kalinin Carriage Works completed the creation of the jet locomotive SVL, a high-speed laboratory rail car. The rail car body was based on a motorized head car, but it received aerodynamic fairings at the front and rear, as well as side sections covered with false panels. The cab and front part of the ER-22 were preserved, which meant the driver had to look through 2 layers of glass. The fairings developed at Moscow State University had a low coefficient of frontal resistance and were tested in a wind tunnel. To reduce air resistance, the automatic coupler was covered with a removable fairing. The car was specially manufactured by the Riga Carriage Works with improved assembly quality. Its length with fairings was 28 meters, and the paint scheme matched the standard for ER-22, cream yellow on top and red on the bottom. SVL received 2 axle bogies with air suspension from ER-22 electric trains, disc brakes, sandboxes to increase wheel adhesion, and aviation turbojet engines from the Yak-40 aircraft. Installed on the roof, they produced up to 3,000 kilograms of thrust, while weighing less than 1 ton. The cabin housed an aviation control panel, and the body contained a diesel generator to power the compressor, lighting, and control systems. This whole marvel weighed 60 tons, 7 of which were taken up by fuel. The tests were conducted in 1971 at the Galutvin-Oziori section, where a speed of 116 miles per hour was achieved. Then, on the Novomoskovsk-Dnepro-Dzerzhinsk line, the speed was gradually increased to 154 miles per hour. However, the goal was not to set a record, but to study the interaction of the wheel rail system for future high-speed trains. In the 1970s, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics had no locomotives capable of sustained speeds over 142.91 miles h, and the railway conditions limited the maximum speed to 155.3 miles h. The problem was that the turbines, located right above the cab, heated it up a lot. And even after fixing the cab heating issue, the project was decided to be frozen due to the measurements. The high speed of the train caused significant mechanical damage to the track. After the completion of the SVL tests, it was left on the territory of the Kalininsky Carriage Works near Doroshika Station, where it remains to this day, the nuclear supertrain. In the middle of the century, humanity dreamed of the widespread use of atomic energy. Projects for atomic cars, airplanes, and even trains were considered. However, in practice, it turned out that such engines are too massive and difficult to operate, and the potential safety issues outweigh their advantages. Nevertheless, at the end of the 70s, the idea of an atomic supertrain was still brought to life, albeit not in reality, but on the screen. In 1979, the television channel aired the series Supertrain, an ambitious, expensive, and catastrophically failed project. Its main character was a hyperspeed atomic express, as luxurious as a cruise liner, with a swimming pool, movie theater, discos, and a shopping center on board. According to the plot, criminal dramas unfolded on the train, involving heirs to vast fortunes, jewel thieves, hitmen, and even a presidential candidate who was killed by his own twin brother. She invested a record-breaking $5 million in the project, an enormous sum by the standards of television in the 70s. 3 models of the train were created for filming, a full-size one for shooting interiors, a scaled-down version for movement scenes, and a miniature for complex composite shots. The train consisted of a single-level head car, the locomotive, and 8 double-decker cars. Its futuristic design reflected the fashion trends of that time. Inspired by the stylish concepts of the 70s, it somewhat resembled the iconic car from the movie Back to the Future. For maximum realism, sets of platforms, railway stations, and an entire network of tracks were built. But despite the expensive sets, star cast, and big ambitions, the series became one of the biggest failures in television history. Only 9 episodes were released. Viewers didn't appreciate either the concept or the script, and critics slammed its ridiculous plot. The filming was plagued with problems, actors' payments were delayed, the budget was spent inefficiently, and one of the train models derailed and crashed. It's symbolic that this incident foreshadowed the fate of the entire project. Supertrain failed so spectacularly that it almost caused bankruptcy. The ratings were terrible, and viewers lost interest after just the first episode. And it was included in the list of the 50 worst television shows of all time. Even the attempt to save the situation by replacing the actors didn't help. In the end, the project was cancelled, remaining in television history as one of the most expensive and catastrophically failed shows in the United States. The armored train. Railroads, from the very moment they appeared, immediately became a significant factor in waging wars. Supplying armies became much easier and faster than by regular roads. Railway junctions and certain sections of tracks used for supplying the army became the most important military targets. At the same time, to protect such sections and to hold back advancing units, military powers developed armored trains. There were many of them. Basically, they performed simple tasks: to move, to shoot, and to repel bullets and shells flying at them. But there were also some particularly interesting examples. This unusual armored train defended the coast of Great Britain. It was used to patrol the coastline in case of a German invasion during World War II. The mini-armored train was lightly armed and armored, since it was a railway with an extremely narrow gauge. Anti-tank guns were installed in the turrets, while other anti-aircraft and regular guns were scattered throughout the rest of the train. The armored train was not effective against large invasion forces, but it could hold off an attack by paratroopers and defend the coastline until reinforcements arrived. Although the train did not have to repel a German ground offensive, it was quite successful in fighting against Luftwaffe aircraft, shooting down 3 lightly armored German planes. During World War II, German armored trains were real fortresses on rails. Their powerful armament, armor, and mobility made them a formidable weapon. But the armored train had one drawback. It could only operate on the railroad. To solve this problem, the Germans invented the ATG-7, a special armored platform that transported light tanks, 38, 35, and even rare self-propelled guns. This car was placed at the end of the armored train and allowed the tank to be quickly unloaded using a retractable ramp, which gave the crew the opportunity to leave the rails and continue the battle on rough terrain. The Panzer 38T, although inferior to medium and heavy tanks, handled partisan units excellently thanks to its speed and maneuverability. And this is a documented case of the use of a Soviet armored train in World War II. The video was recorded to boost morale as part of military propaganda. The recording time is August of '41. At the most difficult time of the war, when the army was retreating, a film was made about an armored train that came to help the Red Army at the front. At the beginning of the video, it talks about an Austrian officer who was taken prisoner and pointed out the location of German units. Then the armored train arrived, equipped with 76mm guns and machine guns. It successfully shelled the forest closest to the railway tracks, where the German unit was hiding. Then the video shows impressive trophies, among which there are guns, shells for them, and mortars. Was there really such a battle? It's doubtful, but armored trains did play their role in the defense. The Soviets also had, for example, the most powerful armored train Kazma Minin. The combat section of the armored train included an armored locomotive, 2 covered armored platforms, 2 open artillery armored platforms, and 4 platforms used for loading equipment or supplies. On the covered armored platforms, turrets from T-34 tanks were installed, equipped with 3-inch guns and paired machine guns. On the artillery platforms, there were 37mm anti-aircraft guns, and, as a powerful bonus, an M8 rocket launcher system similar to those used on Katyusha rocket launchers. The thickness of the side armor of the armored platforms was 45mm. There was also a command post here, connected to the driver's cab by an armored door. From this post, the commander of the armored train controlled the actions of the armored platforms using telephone communication. For external communication, he had a long-range radio station at his disposal. Considering the tank anti-aircraft guns, machine guns, and rocket projectiles, Kazma Minin could participate in any battles at various distances, remaining a formidable unit even on his own. The armored train shot down 14 planes during the war. He took part in the defense of Tula, the liberation of Orel, Bryansk, Gomel, and then in the offensive towards Germany. He made it all the way to the Oder, but the Germans blew up the bridge and Kazma Minin couldn't enter Berlin. And this armored train took part in the Yugoslav War, more precisely, in Bosnia in the years 92 to 95. One of the most dramatic events of the war took place in October of '92 in the city of Gradišak, where local residents, armed only with hunting rifles and captured weapons, faced a powerful attack by the Bosnian Serbs. The Bosniaks had heavy weapons, ammunition, and secret weapons. A specially constructed armored train was a real fortress on rails. This armored train was reinforced with thick armor, armed with cannons, machine guns, and mortars, which made it almost invulnerable to partisan forces. Its task was to suppress the defense of Gradišak and clear the way for the advance of Serbian troops. At that moment, the defenders practically had no means against it. Ordinary firearms and even grenades could not penetrate the armor. But the Bosnians still had one chance: a tank captured from the Serbs. There was little ammunition, but one of the shells hit a vulnerable spot on the train and disabled it. This was the turning point. Without armored support, the Serb attack faltered, and the city held out. During the Anglo-Boer War, the British began to armor trains, protecting them from attacks. The armored trains were equipped with Maxim machine guns and naval guns. Special attention was paid to protecting the locomotives. And this locomotive, Volosataya Mary, got its name because of the armor made from thick hemp ropes taken from a ship. They protected against shrapnel and small arms fire, were cheaper than metal, and were soaked in fireproof liquid. Sikorsky's turbo train. This train, innovative for its time, deserves a separate discussion. It was developed and built by a company headed by an emigrant from the Russian Empire, Igor Sikorsky, who is better known as a talented helicopter designer. The gas turbine engine of the train, created by Sikorsky Aircraft, was the PT-6 aviation motor, modified to the ST-6 version with reduced power. It was assumed that such engines would be less noisy and cheaper to maintain. Externally, the train was different from conventional railroad trains. It consisted of 3, and later up to 9 cars, and had 2 locomotives at once. The front one pulled the train, while the rear one pushed. This is reminiscent of modern electric trains, where both ends of the train are constantly engaged, which increases maneuverability and eliminates the need to rearrange cars when changing the direction of movement. The main innovation concerned the design of the cars. Unlike the traditional scheme with 2-axle bogies under the body, the engineers adapted the Spanish Talgo technology, which we have already mentioned earlier. Its essence lies in the use of single-axle bogies located between the cars rather than under them. This allowed the train to tilt by 3 degrees when going through turns, which increased the permissible speed on curves. Although this system was developed back in the 50s, it only became in demand decades later, when a patent was acquired and work began on creating the original turbo train. Instead of traditional diesel engines, it was decided to use gas turbine engines. Each motor car, which was 22 meters long, housed 3 gas turbine engines with a power output of 455 horsepower each. They were significantly lighter compared to diesel engines, weighing only 136 kilograms each. The electric generator allowed the air conditioning systems, heating, and lighting to be powered. In the locomotives, the passenger compartment was located both in the upper and lower parts of the body, accommodating up to 50 people. The interior was designed for maximum comfort. There were soft chairs with headrests, carpeted aisles, subdued lighting, and also a kitchen for quick meal preparation. Even the air pressure inside the cars was slightly higher than outside, in order to reduce noise levels and prevent dust from entering. In 1968, on the special Trenton-New Brunswick track, the train reached 170 miles per hour, setting a speed record for rail transport with gas turbine engines in 1970. In the second year, this result surpassed the French one, which accelerated to 197 miles per hour. She handed over the documentation on the turbo trains to her division, Sikorsky, after which the United States Department of Transportation acquired both trains. They began operating on the Boston-New York route, carrying up to 144 passengers in a 3-car configuration. With a speed limit of 99.419 miles per hour, the train covered 229.9 miles in 3 hours and 39 minutes, and the occupancy rate of the cars during the first year was 90%. However, in 1976 operations were discontinued, and in 1980 both trains were scrapped. Back in 1966, the Canadian National Railway ordered 5 7-car turbo trains from the United States for the Toronto-Montreal route. Their operation began in 1969, and already on the first day, a speed of 167 kilometers per hour was reached. However, due to the abundance of railway crossings, about 950 along the entire route, the maximum speed had to be limited to 153 kilometers per hour. Subsequently, design flaws were discovered. The weak braking system did not work well at low temperatures. Despite modernization, in 1971, operation was temporarily suspended. The media also negatively affected the reputation of the trains, as they published articles about the excessive noise and discomfort on turns. As a result, in 1973, 3 train sets were converted into 9-car trains. However, due to frequent stops at level crossings, the time advantage compared to the traditional Rapido train was only 30 minutes. In 1974, the technical problems were resolved, and the trains became more reliable, but their service life was limited. A little later, one of the trains burned down due to an oil leak, and the operation of the remaining turbo trains was discontinued. They were replaced by light, rapid, comfortable diesel-electric locomotives, created by Bombardier Transportation. After the turbo trains were decommissioned, Canada lost its high-speed rail technologies. Even today, the Montreal-Toronto route takes an average of 4 hours and 45 minutes, and almost 5 hours in the evening, whereas in the 70s, turbo trains covered the same distance in 4 hours. The golden age of trains, when the development of rail transport drove the progress of humanity, has probably remained in the 20th century. But trains can still surprise us, perhaps with their own progress. But most likely, a breakthrough in some other industry could bring something new to railways as well. And what do you think? Write in the comments and see you in the next videos on our channel.